I lived in a multi-high-rise apartment complex near Miami, Florida during college around 2004 to 2006. I am female and was 18 or 20 at the time. It was my first time living on my own in a city away from my family. These two things happened while living there, and they still creep me out to this day. Apologies in advance, as these are long-winded. Number 1. I lived on the 14th floor in an open-concept studio apartment that had a small balcony with a sliding glass door that would look into my living room and bed space, with a galley kitchen and bathroom in the background, and then a small hallway leading to my front door in between them and connecting the entire space. Two girls my age moved into the studio next to me. They seemed off. They wore sunglasses all the time, never said hi when I said hi, and just gave off a bad vibe. After a couple months, I noticed the two girls were gone. To my knowledge, they didn't move out. But 3 men around their 30s started going in and out of the apartment a lot. They also gave off very creepy vibes, always standing in the hallway but not speaking. Just weird. Often, I would be up all night watching Sex and the City DVDs I rented from Blockbuster while I sat on my couch working on projects for school. I would sometimes leave my vertical blinds slightly turned to allow light and to just see the skyline, etc., while working. One week, my mom came to visit me and was in the kitchen, which has one of those open cutouts in the wall so you could see into the living space and balcony and sliding glass door. And she said to me, "I swear, I just saw someone go onto your balcony and then jump back over." I forgot to add, my apartment and the weirdos next door have a connected balcony with a small short gate in between. Me being a kid and just stressed out about school was like, yeah, whatever, it's probably nothing, and moved on. My mom ended up getting a piece of wood to put in the door frame so no one could open it from the outside. It was always locked as well. About 2 months after that, my mom and grandmother came to visit for a couple days, and decided one night to go to the casino nearby. It was probably around 10 or 11 at night. I didn't go because I was working on a project for school. About 15 minutes after they left, I heard rustling by my front door. I slowly moved to check the peephole as inconspicuously as possible, and I see one of the creeps from next door off to the side of my door, using his right arm to hold himself on my door frame while looking downward. My heart drops, and I remember my face getting really flushed with anxiety. As I'm standing there, thinking where my phone is and what I should do, I start to hear my sliding glass door behind me move, but it was locked, so it was just slightly moving back and forth. As I said, I keep my blinds slightly open, but in a way where I can see the person, but they most likely can't see me. It was the other guy from the same apartment. At this point, it doesn't take much to assume that they know my family had left, and they are at the very least trying to scare me, and at the very most, wanting to harm me. My phone is on the couch, and I'm too scared to move towards the sliding glass door and have this person see me get the phone. As I'm standing there, all of a sudden, sheets of white computer paper start being flung under my door into the apartment hallway. Just literally blank sheets of paper, and the door handle starts going up and down. At this point, I'm in fight or flight mode, and I know I can't run, so I'm just waiting for the guy at the door to kick it in. My only thought was to grab a large carving knife my mom gave me for protection in situations like this. I duck down and get it from the drawer and hide just around the corner in the kitchen. I aimed the knife in my hand at the same height where I had measured and assumed his jugular would be, and I decided that as soon as the door kicked open, I would count to 2 and then start stabbing. I can still feel the tightness in my chest now, and I was breathing so fast and heavy I thought I was going to pass out. The next thing I know, I hear the elevator, which was next to my apartment on the other side, open, and I hear my mom and grandmother talking. Then, the key started to go into the door, and my mom opens the door and screams because I'm standing there terrified with a knife in my hand ready to stab her. Luckily, my mom and grandmother only made it to the Dairy Queen across the building, got dipped cones, and then said, "Hell with it," and came back home, which is kind of funny in itself. We called the complex security, who didn't really do anything, and I called the Miami Police Department, who took a basic report and didn't really do much either. They didn't even go next door to see what was going on. Later on in the week, I saw maintenance workers taking out furniture and appliances. These guys just vanished. I never saw them again, and a couple with a new baby moved in. It was truly one of the scariest situations I've ever been in, and I really feel that if my family didn't come back early, something terrible would have happened. Number 2. Again, still in college, I would stay late at labs and such because of finals so often that I would have to park behind my building but in front of the other building in the complex. As I mentioned, this was a large high-rise complex with multiple buildings and large parking lots in between. Each building has a front and back entrance with a kind of drive-up with a concrete awning of sorts built into the building. Above this awning is a center window where the elevator hallway is, so if you felt so inclined, you could jump out that window and walk around on the awning. I park in the back of my apartment about halfway to the other building, and I see plain as day a gorilla suit, like full-size, full-formed, hair and pecs and everything. I stare at it for a moment and nope out of there. I watch a lot of horror movies and, well, this is the beginning of one. It was weird, but I just thought it was someone playing a prank. Over the next few weeks, it was sometimes there and sometimes not. The guy I was dating at the time saw it too, and we just kind of laughed and thought it was creepy. One night, I get home at around 2 a.m. There was no parking in the front, so I head to the back, and the gorilla is there. That night, it just felt off. I felt very uneasy, and something seemed different about it. I attempted to park as close as I could to my back entrance. The parking lots are overpacked and always full, so it wasn't an easy thing to do. I get out of the car, and, as I said, something just freaked me out tonight about this gorilla suit. I have to get my supplies out of my back seat, so I am trying to keep my eye on the gorilla. What happened next is 100% true, God is my witness. This guy starts walking and jumps off of the awning, and without missing a beat, starts booking it straight towards me. I was in shock. I stood there for a beat or two, thinking, what the hell? And then I just start running full blast to my back door. I didn't even turn around, I just ran. I got inside the lobby and start slamming on the elevator button. I can't see anything, no one's around, and I'm starting to panic. Finally, the elevator opens, and, like a movie, I get inside and hit the door close button like 50 times. And that's it. I get in my apartment and nothing else happened. I never saw the gorilla again. Needless to say, I moved out after this. It was the weirdest apartment I have ever lived in since. I don't know if I attract weird stuff or not, but I have a lot of other stories, mostly based in paranormal or unexplained type stuff if anyone is interested. Thanks for listening, and be careful out there.
Hey folks, I'd like to preface by saying that I'm not a believer in the supernatural. However, I would like some opinions on something that I've witnessed multiple times. How do you explain this? Just what exactly did I witness? It's a large figure in all black. The general shape is human, but a bit too tall, and the face is completely indistinguishable. I am not proud to admit this, but I first discovered it while breaking into an abandoned 5-story facility in the middle of nowhere to steal scrap copper. While there in my first night, I heard doors slamming all night. It was 10 to 20 miles from anything. Only one access point I created myself, along with no evidence of cars anywhere. Thinking it was police, I hid most of the night. It seemed to slam in an order, starting from the first floor until reaching the top, yet there was almost no delay from slams way up high before reverting to what I believe was the first or second floor. I figured it was a security guard doing rounds until I ventured down and noticed the door slam near me. It completely stopped. I chalked it up to nothing, but was a little creeped out when I came back, so I brought a friend. I needed the money. The first few hours were clear, But right around 3 a.m., the slamming started again. Same order. This thing liked 3 a.m. for some reason. Anyway, I placed the broken broom handle and blocked one door. It still slammed anyway. I checked everywhere for wires, hidden mechanisms, and etc. And my buddy was visibly spooked, and we had to leave. I was curious and wanted to stay and understand. As I am reluctantly walking out, I hear a clear and distinguishable breath and see his hair flutter for a second. He screams and runs for the exit, and I sit there for a second confused. I can hear a faint female giggle. It does not sound malicious. Anyway, at this point, I am no longer motivated with petty money. I come back with a braver friend. Once again, it starts at 3 a.m. I have no idea why, but she will not show up before this. What I never considered is after daylight savings. She still comes out at the same time. I thought the little prank was funny, so I said hi to her the next time, introduced myself, and when grabbing a drink, I'd leave one out for her and just casually chat. I told my story to a paranormal investigator, and he gave me something called an EVP recorder. It basically records low sounds as I asked questions. I did not hear any responses, but there was a common faint growling or shifting sound that you could hear in person. I cannot describe it, but if any experts want it, I will send you a copy as long as you respect my privacy. The EVP guy was unable to explain what it was. When I got home, I was shocked to hear a low but very clear female voice. There were no women with us. She seemed to pick and choose which questions to answer. The clearest response was, "Can you tell me your name?" The thing that unnerved me about this, though, was the answer was very clearly not her name. Different people have different answers to what they hear. Many of the people I brought swore she had a crush on me. I don't believe this part, but she only answered my questions politely, while you can hear the anger in her responses to others. But as to why I call this the tall black figure, we eventually saw either her or another entity. The reason I am unsure if they are the same person is because this entity did not seem sentient. She seemed very playful and interactive. The figure in black materialized in a hallway, walked 10 to 12 paces, turned a corner, and reached towards a freezer almost like grabbing a cup. It always vanished at the exact moment and does not show up on any pictures. The route it follows is identical, and the actions are identical with no deviation whatsoever. I once stood directly in its path, despite my girlfriend, best friend, and brother begging me not to, and it did not deviate, react, or acknowledge me in any way. This is long, so I will finish it up. The female voice eventually stopped responding. My friend, who never got responses from her, asked very rudely, "Are you aware that you're dead, deceased, no longer living?" The answer was incredibly hostile. She never once responded to me again, and I actually missed her. The door slamming continued, and the robotic figure in black continued. She never came back. There are many more details to this if anyone is curious, but it's already quite long. One thing I forgot to mention is that she seemed hostile and less playful if I brought a woman along, and she did not answer a single woman's EVP question.
I just came across this sub and figured this story was perfect to share here. I shared it in r/scary stories 2 years ago, not realizing that sub was mainly for fictional spooks. But I promise y'all, it's 100% real and still gives me nightmares 4 years later. When I was 18, I worked at my college's residence building at the front desk, and I think I almost got assaulted or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms and half of the 3rd floor were student rooms. The whole building operated with a hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated, and all the doors were powered by 4 AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the doors. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working an overnight shift at around 1 or 2 a.m., and he said he left his keycard in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many keys remade as they wanted, hypothetically. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary keycard and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new keycard for his room and asked if he was a student or a hotel guest, and he replied, student. At this point, I should have checked our system to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgot. I used to trust people way too easily at this job, but quickly learned not. Later on the night, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., he came to the desk again and said he couldn't get into his room. I asked him if he had just forgotten his key again, and he said no, the door wasn't working. I asked him if the lights were coming on when he swiped his card, and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I'd have to change the batteries, and I went up to his room with him. He asked me what my name was, and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the room door manually with my master key, and told him I have to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, no, it's okay, I'll close it, and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really effing weird, but I tried not to think about it. I had changed the batteries on plenty of other doors by this point, and some students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their rooms to be on display for anyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent, and I thought that he might be an international student since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought that maybe it was just a language barrier issue. At this point though, I really felt like something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. As I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he kept trying to entice me to go further into the room, saying his bed was broken and he needed me to take a look at it. There was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, I have a key, go get it, and threw it under the bed. He said there was a leak under his fridge. He just kept trying to get me down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him, no, I'll send maintenance up in the morning to take a look at anything that was broken. I had my back to him and he asked me if I would take off my glasses. I said, no, I need them to see. His tone of voice changed, and in the most steady, chilling manner, he said, Ella, it's okay. You can take them off. And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away and tried to remain composed and said, no, thanks, I need them on. Even though he was creeping the F out of me, I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get in trouble if he complained about me or risked upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit and undid the door deadbolt and opened it up in the process. He jumped towards the door to close it again and told me to keep it closed. I told him no, I had to have it open to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with a little wisp of hair on the top of my forehead and tried touching my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me and focused on getting the F out of there. He once again tried to get me to follow him into the bedroom, saying the bed was broken, and I went as far as the bed frame to see if I could spot any actual problem with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in the kitchen, no shower curtain in the bathroom, no sheets on the bed, nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back to the international student theory, thinking he had just arrived today and hadn't gotten a chance to buy anything yet. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few more seconds before announcing that it was fixed and quickly gathered my door kit and left. Before I had reached the elevator, he came back out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes and called out, "Ella, the door isn't fixed, you need to come back." I went back and opened the door manually and told him if the door was broken, I'd have to set up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got to the front desk, I checked the computer and saw that the room he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in our back office and called campus security. He came back a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait. Now that I knew he wasn't a resident, he tore the corner off a slip of paper that I had sitting on the desk and drew a flower on it, then put it back on top of the papers. When security arrived, he ran back up to the empty room and tried to convince them that he lived there so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which had decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to me asking if he really did live there. Obviously he effing didn't. That's why I called you guys, crying and terrified. He kept injecting to argue that he did live there, but couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for his student card and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove he lived there. While they were trying to grab his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave was prefixed by as if trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said across the street. One security guard asked if he lived in the apartment across the street, and he said yes, but couldn't tell them what the building number was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months later, and apartment 1200 doesn't exist. When security asked him what his purpose was in sneaking into a room, he just kept up with the ums and ahs and saying he didn't know. They asked, "Were you trying to see a friend? Do you know anyone who lives here? Were you here to hurt someone?" And he kept fidgeting and saying, "I don't know, no reason, I was just here." At one point, he tried to tell them that he was my friend, at which point I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally had never seen him before that night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still effing unsettling. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured out the room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later, a housekeeper came to the desk and told me they found the door deadbolt open, the TV on, and a housekeeper inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left for the night, and when the creep let himself into the building, he found it. I never saw him again, And to this day, I have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last summer, and overnight shifts still give me the heebie-jeebies.
I grew up in an 8-bedroom farmhouse with my dad, until I grew up and moved out. We always had extra rooms not being used, and because of the age of the house plus all this extra space, there was always an eeriness, like someone looming in the shadows. If I had to get a drink in the middle of the night, I looked at the ground the whole time because I was scared of what may be looking back at me from the dark corners, rooms, and hallways. Even the windows and mirrors were avoided because I wasn't sure what I'd see looking back at me. When I was around 12 years old, I questioned why the room that used to be my nursery was locked from the outside. I didn't think it was weird before then. My dad needed a room for storage, and I figured he just wanted to keep me out. I brought it up with him one day, asking what's so important in there that he needs to keep me out, even though I'm not a child anymore. Typical 12-year-old mentality. Turns out, I was not entirely correct about the lock. My dad, with a very serious demeanor, sat me down and answered my inquiry. When I was a baby, 1 to 2 years old, I slept in this nursery room on the 2nd floor, next to my dad's room. This room was painted by my sister, especially for me, with Winnie the Pooh characters and fluffy clouds. The type of thing I think back on and appreciate. The effort and creativity was so admirable. I have a photo of me smiling at Pooh Bear on the wall while we were setting it up. But I'm not the most tech-savvy to figure out how to link this photo. Anyway, I was in this nursery in my crib. Again, right next to my dad's room. The perfect age to be on my own. Every night, though, my dad was woken up by me screaming and crying. He had raised 4 children before me, so he was not making first-time parent mistakes that would otherwise be in question. He thought it was probably the switch to being in my own room rather than being in his room that caused my nightly discomfort. He considered bringing my crib back into his room, but of course the nursery was all ready to go. I had just graduated. For a while, when I cried in terror, he would come in and check on me, only to find that nothing was wrong in the sense of present stressors like temperature, diaper change, hunger, or thirst. He would stay with me until I fell asleep, or keep the light on to make me feel safer, and then return to his room to get some actual rest. One night, after finally having enough of my distress, he decided to camp out on the floor of my nursery to see if he could figure out what was the matter, but mostly to try and sleep through the night. This was the last time anyone slept in there. I was able to doze off now that I wasn't alone. He, on the other hand, was tossing and turning on the hardwood floor, not comfortable enough to sleep. As he lay there on the floor, mulling over the situation. Boom, boom, boom. He was jolted to his feet by a few massive blows to the floorboards beneath him, centered directly on his back, as if someone on the 1st floor had a battering ram aimed at the ceiling. His first instinct was to rush downstairs and check for intruders. He is a man of logic, brave and ready to defend his family. However, when he got down there, the lights were off, There was no one downstairs. Front door locked, windows locked. No sign of forced entry. No one else lived with us. Our closest neighbor was down the road a quarter mile, and why would they break in to just bang on the ceiling? Let alone have it mapped out where my dad would be sleeping in my nursery. And the force of the blows, this wasn't normal. After this event, my dad brought my crib back into his bedroom, and I was able to sleep without screaming or crying, beyond needing a diaper change or something normal. He brought the Bible into the nursery for extra measure and casted out any evil that may have invited itself in there. He locked that nursery and only used it for storage after that, and only went in during the daytime. To this day, that old lock is still on the door, as if a lock will keep spirits locked in. Short of pretending that experience never happened, he couldn't rationalize it enough to do anything else. We think that the entity was evil and malicious, and when my dad tried protecting me, this only pissed it off. As I grew up in that house, I had a hard time sleeping in any room on my own. Many nights I ended up rushing to the couch in the living room, turning the TV on and watching Disney till I fell asleep. But even then, I was not comfortable. There were always eyes on me. There were many more unexplained events from the farmhouse, but this was the most direct encounter with evil my dad has ever had.
I have been working for an independent hotel for just over 4 years now. We are the #1 rated hotel in our city, and proud of it. I mostly work in housekeeping, but I've done some time at the front desk as well. I love my job, and I have always said that my bosses are great. Now, being a housekeeper, I have seen some things. I've seen a room where someone snuck in their dog, kitten, and chicken. We don't allow pets. I once had a room that I was cleaning as a stayover that had tripods set up around the bed, professional camera equipment cases, an adult-sized pacifier, on-site, and XL-sized children's diapers. The 2 people that were in that room were in their early 20s. I even had a room once that we had to call the cops on for a raid because we found meth. They found a lot of drugs and guns in that room. But today is the first time I've ever actually felt scared to be in a guest's room. As I'm working on a room that's already been vacated, a man in the next room over catches me at my supply cart. He's set to be staying for several days and tells me, "You can go ahead and clean my room now. I'm going down for breakfast." Excellent. I love getting my stayovers done early on. It makes things easier for the people working laundry the sooner we get the dirty laundry down to them. So I pop over into his room, opening it up and propping the door open with a stopper like we always do. The first thing I notice is that he has around 20 prescription bottles lined up on one of the 2 beds, along with insulin and needles. I'm nosy, I'll admit it, and I wanted to see what he was on. Oddly, it was only 2 different types of medication for all 20 bottles. About 2/3 were a diabetes medication, and the rest were a cholesterol medication. That's a little weird that he has so many bottles of the same meds, but whatever. I go to make the bed and see that some of the bedding has been stained. I sigh, knowing now that I'll have to change all the bedding instead of just being able to turn down the sheets and blanket. So I leave the room, closing it behind me to go get the linens I need, and then head right back to the room. I prop the door open again and head to set the clean linens on the desk chair, when I see out of the corner of my eye 2 notes sitting on the TV armoire. It wouldn't mean anything, except I caught the word "kill" scrawled on it. I dropped the linens and took a closer look. What I read on the first note made my blood run cold. "You don't have to forgive her, you just can't kill her. You were here to take money and alcohol away from you. Get over having to kill her, and you can safely leave." My heart was pounding. My eyes went to the second note, which had just looked like a to-do list at first glance, but in the end made my stomach churn. Spray and wash. Apply for Medicare. Insubordination. The soul is healed by being with children. Bank card follow-up. Inheritance. Savings. Kauai Pop 10,500. Map Montana. There will be a day of reckoning. Did you tell Mom what I said? How did Bev get my address? It was too much. I quickly snapped pictures of them on my phone so I could show my boss why I would not clean his room. I left the room quickly, closing it up behind me. As the door closes, I turn and I see the man just 10 feet away from me coming back to his room. My heart is in my throat, but I manage a smile and tell him, I need more supplies. I'll be back to your room in a bit. I take off straight for the elevator, having noticed our maintenance man waiting for the slow transport. In a hushed tone, I tell him what I found, and he sees I'm shaken. Not a normal state for me. He rides down with me, and I go straight to my boss and tell her that for the first time in all these years, I am not comfortable being in a guest's room. I show her the pictures, and her face is still and pale. She goes to the front desk and asks our general manager for a minute of her time, and brings her into the office to show her. She agreed that this was not a safe situation, and took our maintenance man with her to go inform the man that he had 1 hour to get his belongings and leave the hotel, and that he was not welcome back. I spent a few minutes in the laundry room, trying to calm down, and then my boss went back up with me to the floor until the man was officially out of the hotel. I don't know who Bev is, and I don't know who the woman is that he didn't feel he needed to forgive. But man in room 422, let's never meet again.
I was backing up the photos on my phone today and I found some which I took the day of the incident. I gave it some thought and decided why not share it on here. Being anonymous and all that, maybe this can even serve as a PSA of sorts. Always trust your gut feeling. Last year I was living by myself at the time, before my partner and I moved in together. For some background, my partner used to work very hectic shifts. Sometimes he finished at 5 p.m, sometimes 6 p.m, sometimes 9 p.m, and he would let me know if he'd be dropping by that day. Though he usually wouldn't be able to give me a time, but at least I knew he'd be coming by. It was around 8 p.m, and I was upstairs in the bedroom, working on an embroidery project. I had my AirPods in, so I wasn't too aware of what was going on around me. I remember feeling the bed rattle. My bedroom was right above the front door, so whenever someone closed the door, as it was very old and heavy, it always rattled my bed frame. And this would usually indicate my partner has arrived. I didn't immediately go downstairs to greet him, as I really wanted to finish off the piece of embroidery I was working on. It was about 5 minutes before I took out my AirPods and proceeded to make my way out of my bedroom and onto the stair landing. I was about to call out for him when I realized he didn't leave his work jacket or work boots in the entry. He knew full well I don't like shoes, especially work boots, all over my carpeted floors. I assumed I must have imagined feeling the bed shake. I went back into my bedroom and was about to put my AirPods back in when I very distinctly heard a big crash come from downstairs. It sounded like something very heavy was dropped. I freaked out and called my boyfriend's name down from my bedroom doorway. I got no reply, but I sure as hell started hearing heavy footsteps pacing towards the entryway. My gut feeling was that something here was very wrong. I turned and grabbed my phone from the bed and bolted to the bathroom, which was the only room in the house with a lock. I called the police as I started hearing those same heavy footsteps make their way up the stairs. I've never, ever been scared of those creaking sounds coming from the stairs, but it was different then. At the time, it felt as if I've never heard a scarier sound. As I was on the phone to the police, the only thing I could tell the lady on the phone was my address, over and over again. I was more focused on how I was going to get out of there. I wasn't going to wait and see what would happen, or who this person was. So I flung open my small bathroom window, and feet first, slid down onto the lower roof. My adrenaline was so high, I had to momentarily put my phone into my bra, as I had no pockets and needed both my hands. I just remember hearing the police dispatcher keep asking over and over if I'm okay and what was happening. I didn't even have time to tell her what I was doing. It felt as though my body had gone on autopilot. Once on the bottom roof, I lowered myself again, now onto the pavement, as I fell right onto my knees, no less. I got right up and bolted down the street. It was completely dark, with it being mid-October. The dispatcher was still on the phone when I finally got on it again, and I told her whilst running that there was someone in my home, and how I just jumped out of the window to get away. I ran for what felt like forever, until the lady on the phone said to focus on finding a shop where I could go into and wait for the police. I remembered my boyfriend, and told the lady I needed to call him. I made it to a Tesco Express by then, and though she wanted to keep me on the phone, I said I needed to make sure my partner didn't go into my home and potentially risk running into the other person. I got in contact with my partner, who had just finished work. It was around 9 p.m. by then, and was driving to my house. I told him what happened, and he instead started heading towards the shop I was outside of. I felt such relief when he got here. I remember taking a picture of my scratched up knees when I got into the car. For some reason, I got very fixated on them. My partner called the police back for me, as the shock started setting in then, and he let them know he was with me. It took some time before the police finally arrived at my home. I was told my front door was left wide open, and in the living room, the side table had been knocked over. My home wasn't ransacked, but it did look as though someone booked it out of there relatively quickly. Upstairs, my bathroom door was kicked in so hard that the door frame itself was indented in, though nothing was stolen. Once they looked over the place, I was called and told I could return. A call-out ambulance crew was called and they looked me over. They sorted out my knees and did some sort of assessment to see if I was okay mentally, and told me to go see my GP the next morning about my knees. Reports and statements were written up, and I stayed with my boyfriend for 2 weeks after that. I had to hire someone to fix my door frame, along with having a security system installed, as I don't think I'd be able to return without it. They never found out who this man was. My neighbors had cameras, and all we ever figured out about this person was that he was a man who just walked right into my home like it was his. Zero hesitation. My front door was unlocked, as I was expecting my partner to arrive soon. I live in a very safe village, and leaving the door unlocked was a common occurrence, though I've never left it unlocked since. I still live there with my partner and 2 dogs now. The man has never been back, though we have quite obvious cameras around the property, along with visible security company signage. This was easily the most terrifying experience I've had in my life. It's so hard to describe or tell people. It's like I wasn't in control of my own body when this was happening. Autopilot went on, and all I knew was I needed to get out of there.
I live in a small rural community in the eastern US. It's a nice little town. Because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've moved twice, but that's a story for another time. However, it is relevant for this story for multiple reasons. The first being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as have motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department. I can see it from my living room window, and a couple blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garbage trucks at night and on weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on the property next to me, most people on the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I did not attend because it's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighbourhood was pretty quiet because most everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar, large white pickup drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction, only about 20 seconds later. This time, it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people have been known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks, usually at night, to avoid getting caught, because they don't want to or are unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large, black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. Now, I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbours are up to no good, but something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling. So I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events and pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags. He took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was, but eventually he got it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. "Crap," he hissed under his breath. "What?" I asked. "It's a body." I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she'd asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. Coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house, along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate or of the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing frames, the officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage, as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details. I know that the body was in pieces, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public. I don't know if the coroner has even been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know he could dump there? He probably thought it'd get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend, and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me feel physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would never have been found, may never find potential justice. Their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it might just happen again to another poor soul. I hope it's not me. Dear God, please don't let it be me. I think it's time I moved again. Third time's a charm, right?
This is something that happened to me 5 or so years ago. I was fresh out of university with my degree in international development. I wanted to help underserved communities, develop meaningful projects, and see more of the world. I was young. I was naive, eager to get started. I took one of the first jobs that offered me a position. It wasn't something that I necessarily wanted to do, but it was adjacent to my interests and, more importantly, took me to a place I'd never been before. I loved everything when I arrived. It was beautiful, sunny, and green. My new coworkers, all local staff, were amazing and so kind. My boss invited me to play soccer on Sundays with his family. My fellow project coordinator would go out dancing with me on the weekends. And my roommate, a fellow expat working in development as well, was a fun and spunky woman that I adored. I felt so blessed. Then, one day, it changed. I was walking downtown with a friend. There was a vegetable and fruit market that had great fresh produce directly from the farmers growing it. It was about a 20-minute bus ride from my apartment, so not close, but not incredibly far either. My friend and I loaded up and began walking over to a quiet corner to call a cab to help us haul our goods back. And then I heard it. Hey, miss, insert my exact address. It took me a second to realize he was shouting my address. I turned around to see a man hanging out of his car, slowly crawling along the road with us. My friend recognized my address too. She turned to me and asked, "Do you know him?" I'd never seen him before, and he kept shouting, "Yeah, you. You're living in the back house, on the second floor, right?" That made it even worse. I lived on a big suburban lot with 2 houses, one in the front, where my landlady and her family lived, and the second in the back. The second house was split into 2 apartments. The bottom floor housed 2 students, while I lived on the second floor with my roommate. You couldn't see the second house from the road, much less the stairway that led to the second floor. My heart was pounding. I wanted to shout back at the guy, but I was scared. I was a 22-year-old woman living in a foreign country, and I didn't want to draw attention. I didn't know how people would react, and I didn't know how he would react. So, we walked. My friend tried to comfort me, saying that maybe he knew my landlady's family. I was probably the only redhead in the whole country. He could be a neighbor that I hadn't met. The encounter didn't leave me. It stayed in my mind. A week or so passed, and I stopped glancing behind my back whenever a car drove by. I started to feel secure. Then, he showed up again. I was walking home from work. It was getting dark. My office was a 15 to 20 stroll from my apartment. Perfect as a quick way to stretch my legs. I was halfway home when I felt someone watching me. Then the slow crawl of a car sidling up beside me. I knew it was him without looking. "Miss, my address," he said, leaning out of his window, one hand on the wheel. Why you shy? I ignored him and kept walking. There was no one around. It was getting dark. Come on, he called. Let me give you a ride. I know where you live. Not reassuring. I started to feel my chest tighten. I wanted to call someone but didn't know what he would do if I reached for my phone. I was practically jogging now, but he just sped up to match my pace. Listen. And now he was angry, his voice hard. You don't just ignore a man like that. I wondered what I would do if he stopped the car. He looked fit, young. He could probably catch me. He could hurt me. So I did something that, in retrospect, seemed absolutely bizarre. I yelled at him. Wildly. Rabidly. I did it in my first language, not what they spoke in this country. Not a language that he would ever have heard, probably. I streamed curse words and threats, anything I could think of. I'll never forget that confused fury on his face. But he did slow down, letting me run ahead. I could see a woman at a bus stop at the intersection ahead. If I got to her, maybe she'd help. Maybe he would get scared off. By the time I got to the woman, he was gone. I kept walking home, looking behind me with every step. I told my roommate about what had happened, and she told me not to bother reporting it to the police since they were corrupt and wouldn't do anything. When I told my boss, he told me the same. He said he had a baseball bat and would come whenever I called. I saw the man again 2 weeks later. He was sitting in his car, parked in front of the gates to my apartment. I had been about to take out the trash, but retreated before he could see me. I told my landlady, and when she went over to confront him, he drove off. This continued for weeks. Not every day, but once or twice a week. He was always there, waiting. I took cabs to and from work. I never traveled alone. I barely slept, waiting for him to break in and kill me. My last weekend abroad, he almost did. I went out drinking with a group of my friends, 4 of us in total. We were celebrating the end of my contract, and I was happy to go home in a few days. I couldn't wait to see my family. I couldn't wait to put an ocean between me and that man. We had beers at a local bar, a 5 to 10 minute walk max from my apartment. When it started to get late, around 1, we tried to get a cab, but it was impossible. The roads were jammed and people were everywhere outside, so cabs couldn't even get to us. So, we thought, even though others warned us not to, let's walk home. It would be faster than calling a cab. We'll be fine. We're a group of 4. No one will hassle us. We got halfway there when we had to cross a main road. There were no streetlights. It's not that kind of place. The road was absolutely empty. Not a single car in sight. So we crossed the road. A few more minutes, but then we were backlit with bright headlights of a car coming up. We glanced back. A cop car. 2 men in the front. And I knew, even though I couldn't see from the bright lights in my eyes, that he was driving. He was a cop. The Jeep slowed, as I knew it would. He rolled down the window to drawl. "Hey, Miss... address. Nice night, yeah?" My friends immediately knew who he was. I could see how nervous they were. We were alone on a dark, empty street in the middle of the night. They were cops, so they were armed. No one would intervene, probably. Too dangerous. "You girls need a ride?" He leered. His friend, who I could see now, was grinning hugely. My last few days, I thought, and this is how it ends. We sped up our pace. I don't know what our plan was other than to just get away. And then I heard one of the doors of the Jeep open as the passenger jumped out. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life, although I didn't dare turn back to see. We were at the turn to my street now, 2 minutes more to get to safety. The car was right behind us. Whoever had gotten out of the car was right behind us. 2 of my friends were ahead now while another clutched my hand and dragged me along. Then out of nowhere, another car appeared. They were coming from the opposite direction, illuminating us all. When they slowed to see what was going on, I've never been so grateful. It was an older couple and they looked concerned. I think they knew something very bad was about to happen. I heard, not saw, the car door swing open. I almost got hit as they sped past us in a hurry. The other car stayed, watching. They offered to escort us home, driving alongside just in case, but I knew he wouldn't come back. Not tonight. I still took a cab with my friends to their place for the night, and we took my roommate with us, just in case. Nothing happened after that. My last 2 days were uneventful, although I couldn't shake the feeling that he might show up at any given moment. Driving to the airport, all packed up and ready to go home, my cab got pulled over by a cop. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't him, although it could have been. It wasn't until I got on the plane, until I landed in my home country, that I finally felt that terror leave me. I still get nervous when cars drive up behind me, when men roll down their windows to shout at me. It's never him, but still, you never know. Let's not meet again, stranger who knows where I live.
I've come to a point in life where my mom is trying to tell me all those family secrets I was too young to understand. Every weekend or so, we have these long talks. It was a bit off-putting at first, but I eventually came to value the anecdotes and lessons she gave me. They had the feel of bedtime stories, really, only the protagonists were now my family and people I knew. The implications of the events were very real, and the effects ranged from anger to laughter to nostalgia. Nostalgia. That's what I first felt when we talked about the old house. That building which has seen of late many changes in ownership and purpose. That building which is always closed and evacuated exactly after 10 p.m. That building with an old rusty plaque that dates back to 1810. That building was where I lived for most of my childhood. When I found out that many locals thought of it as a haunted place, I was confused. My days as a child roaming its halls and corridors, whose height was unlike any house I have ever seen, were quite normal and fond to me. I had no memory whatsoever of anything paranormal taking place, not even the classic friend that was but a product of my imagination thing. Doubtful and sometimes mocking faces were the reaction to my uneventful experience. I had just ignored the matter up until my mom brought it up at one of our talks. Did anything strange ever happen to you or my brothers? Nothing ever happened to me. That was my first question, and then Mom started from the very beginning. We arrived at the old house when I was about 6. Mom had truly struck a good deal. We would get to live in the ground floor of this massive 2-storied beautiful house and pay a small rent if we agreed to help the cleaning lady with the first floor once a month. Maybe it was too good a deal to be true, actually. The owners didn't care to mention it, but others warned Mom of the danger. The house was feared, hair being pulled by an invisible hand, footsteps on the upper floor, knocks on windows whose maker never showed up, stuff out of place, and the like. Those were boringly common tropes about haunted old places, and people loved to talk even when they never visited the place themselves, my mom thought. So, she decided to take the offer, although not without a certain degree of dread. But, as papers were being signed and furniture being moved, something happened. A neighbor, an old lady that had, as my mom vividly recalled, the habit of looking behind you when talking to you, said, "You'd best be mindful of the girl. She's a devilish one, no two ways about it." And then, the neighbor told the tale of a little girl that was buried within one of the walls of the house. Apparently, she had an accident, and, as a weird custom had it, she was made part of the building, so as to make it stronger. As far-fetched as it seemed, my mom took note, perhaps out of fear for this crone-looking figure. But I believe it was mainly due to her strong instinct to protect the family now that Dad took off and ran. It occurred just a day before we slept for the first time at the old house. My mom went to the building all by herself, directly to what would be our washing room. She faced the wall inside of which this girl was supposedly lying. She said a prayer out loud, and then she whispered straight to the white, now turned yellow, peeled-off surface. "We mean you no harm. We just want to live here like a true family, so please don't do anything to hurt us." After that, she left our fanciest platter with some candy before the decaying wall, as well as a couple of votive candles. Our very first days at the old house have disappeared in the mists of our memories. If anything scary ever happened, it would have had to be minor so as to be eclipsed by all the great times we had. My mom always kept the girls' platter full of candies and desserts. Whenever she bought or baked something sweet, a bit of it went to the platter. Who would have imagined that I had to share with a ghostly presence? And that seemed to be the end of the otherworldly chapter. But, as we reminisced about the important things that transpired at those 6 or 7 years we spent at the house, weird anecdotes started to come to my mom's memory. Since the old house was quite large, it became sort of a hot spot for both my mom's and my big brother's friends. We would have these big, albeit chill, parties every month or so. This always seemed strange to Mom. The house was well known for its paranormal happenings, so it would follow that but a few people would want to come visit. Despite that, as I clearly remember, they did want to, and badly so. I personally like to think the ambiance we created was usually strong enough to ward off any presence with ill intent. At any rate, on one occasion my brother threw a party at his own living room. Yes, the building actually had an entirely separate and independent small wing. It was late at night, dudes and gals were dancing to my brother's DJ skills, but then someone came near to talk to him. It was a friend of his, and he claimed to have seen a kid using the rusty, creaking swing that was beyond my brother's place. He went to take a look from the window. The structure of the contraption could be barely made out. Indeed, the seat was moving to the constant creaks, but it was empty. My brother went out to the empty lot I used as a playground during the day. It was completely enclosed by tall abandoned buildings, so at night the place looked as dark as some beast's throat. He called out to me. No answer was made, and the creaking slowly halted. So he decided to go look for me at Mom's wing, meaning the main wing of the house. Once inside, my mom ran into him, and he told her that the empty lot was a dangerous place for a kid to play at during the night. She was weirded out. "Dear, your little brother has been sleeping at his room since your friends arrived." He couldn't believe it. Together, they went to pay a visit to my room, to which I answered with a kind of snoring one gets from sleeping too hard. "Then who was that kid my friend saw at the swing? I saw the thing moving on its own, I swear." Needless to say, the party moved to the main wing, away from the beast's throat, and lit with those really old, beautiful lamps my mom still keeps around. "A kid?" I exclaimed. It gave me goosebumps, although my curiosity was piqued. "But didn't you yourself ever see this kid?" Again, she told me she didn't see anything at all, but she did start to remember the time an aunt of hers came by to the old house when we were away. Now, the main entrance to the house has practically stayed as it was during my childhood. A big 2-piece black metal gate that was opened using a remote was how cars came to a narrow garden and then entered the garage. The gates had a metal netting at the bottom, and it reached low enough for anyone to clearly see the feet of people standing nearby at either side. It was a cool feature. As a kid, I liked to try and spot whoever dared to use the doorbell. This very doorbell was no doubt relentlessly pressed by one of my mom's aunts at a certain date. Apparently, she wanted to ask urgently about a piece of gossip. A pair of feet wearing kid shoes greeted her through the netting some minutes in. "Hi, dear. Is your mom home?" The voice of an infant gave a sharp, "No." "Well then, would you mind letting me in? I'll wait for her. When is she coming back?" In a hard-to-describe tone, the person on the other side admitted that he didn't know. "I'm locked up. I'm all alone. My mother left me here and I can't get out." The woman felt pity for her grandniece and decided to stay put with him until his mother came home. After a few more minutes, it happened. My mom arrived in her old crimson Cherokee. She gave a honk when she saw her aunt, and they both entered the old house. Mom started to unload the groceries while her aunt talked to her. "How could you leave your son like that, all alone? He was very sad. Guess he went into the house." My mom suddenly stopped and frowned. "What are you talking about? He was with me all along." The trunk opened, and there I was, playing with some toys. My grand aunt was incredulous, so she grabbed me by the hand and touched my face, getting more and more pale by the second. She started to babble. "It's you! It's really you! You're here!" We all went to the living room, but then I left to do something else. My mom told me that it took a couple of chocolates to get her aunt out of the shock. Of course, she never dared to go even close to the old house again, and soon all of our relatives followed suit. These are the most prominent stories my mom told me. Many other things happened, but they were much more cliché and rather short. But, according to my mom and the friends who were involved, they did happen. And, as if that wasn't enough, you've got some facts. The old house has never again been used as a house. Only businesses have set up shop, but a lot of them have left rather quickly. Nowadays, there is a restaurant bar, although I've heard stories that point to something weird taking place. At 9 p.m., all patrons are asked to leave, even during weekends. That's right. Keep in mind that most businesses of their kind make a lot of their profit during these crucial hours. A friend of the family had this evacuation happen to him, to which he asked why. One of the waiters told him that they all left the building before 10 p.m. because of the terrifying things that occurred after. Apart from that, let's not forget that the house is at least 200 years old or so. A faded plaque at the front says that the building is meant to honor some local cavalry unit of the Independence War. Frankly, I don't know what to think of all this. Maybe I should just let it go, as it really doesn't bother me and I can't remember anything weird happening to me. Nonetheless, I'm about to start an important chapter in life, one that may take me away from my hometown and friends for a long time. Wouldn't it be nice if I could look more into this, so as to indulge in a bit of nostalgia and, just maybe, begin a journey of self-discovery? It is also intriguing to know why all close relatives, meaning Mom, my brother, my sister, and myself, didn't have anything bad or scary happen directly to us. Is it because of the ritual my mom did regularly? What about the playful boy and the girl that was supposedly buried within one of the walls? Signed, Adaptable Bark, 9. What's up, everybody? This is the Lone Wolf here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this amazing video. I am so thrilled that I was able to pull this off. What better way to celebrate Halloween on my channel than my very first mega collaboration video? I want to take this moment to thank all of the narrators who worked on this video with me. They are all amazing narrators, and I am so glad that we got to work together on this. So, Miss Creepy Tales, Papa Scare, SilverThreads, ScareLab, As the Raven Dreams, and 242 Reads, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to subscribe to any of them, there will be links to their channels in the description below, along with timestamps so you can see when their stories come into play in the video. I also want to give a special shout out to all of the Redditors who allowed us to read their stories in this video. There will of course be links to their Reddit posts in the description below for anybody else who wants to read them. If you're new to the channel, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you enjoy my narrations. Turn on the bell for notifications and join the Lone Wolf Pack. If any of you guys want to send me a message, like a personal scary story or a creepypasta recommendation, or you just want to talk to me, there will be links to my email account and my Twitter account in the description. I also want to take this time to mention that I'm using some music from a new music artist, Creepy Oz, who is also a horror narrator. He is an awesome horror narrator and music artist, and I am very glad that I got to use some of his work. If you guys want to subscribe to him, there will be a link to his channel in the description, alongside all of the other music artists that I used, and each individual track that I used for those of you interested in the music. And last but certainly not least, if any of you guys have any ideas or tips for me to make my videos better, please leave me a comment or send me a personal message. Until next time, you all stay spooky. And remember, the hunt begins when the moon is full. Happy Halloween.